Part 4. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the shore. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 32. Sierra. He could already call her name fluently, and the voice coming from across the water tank was as beautiful as ever. Sierra's nose felt sore and she said in a voice with a strong nasal tone, "Are you a stupid fish? I let you go, why were you caught on the shore again?" Her distressed and angry voice was like a small hand scratching at Roxide's heart, itching. "There was an accident." He stared at her face closely, his eyes greedy. "You will be treated as an exhibit tonight." Sierra put her hand on his webbed paw through the glass and said sadly, "You are too far from the coast, and I can't find a way to transport you out blatantly." "I'll follow you." He pressed his erect nose against the glass, as if this would bring him closer to her. The humid air and chaotic environment were not suitable for him to be kept here. Sierra put her hands against the glass and was silent for a moment. Click. An extremely clear sound cracked from the glass surface. A crack appeared out of thin air on the piece of glass that Logosied was pressing with his hand. He wanted to come up with it now. After realizing this, Sierra immediately stood up and yelled in a low voice, "Lawside! Stop! You have no legs. You can't walk with me at all. There is no sea water here to moisten your body." Fishtail. Luxid's python-like fishtail slapped the bottom of the tank, and his entire body floated up to the top of the tank. There was an iron protective net on top, and his webbed hands easily lifted it and moved it aside. Logosied's abdomen was pressed against the edge of the water tank, and half of his body from the tail to the fish's tail was leaning out of the tank. "Sierra." He stretched out his hand to her, his lake blue eyes full of desire. The top of Sierra's head was blocked by a shadow of the mermaid, and the smell of sea water hit her face. His silver hair fell on Sierra's shoulders, and the ice-cold water soaked through her clothes and touched her skin. The only light she could see now was those bewitching eyes. Rox's webbed paws gently touched her face. The silky and delicate touch was different from any human's textured palms. "Take me away, Sarah," he murmured softly, and his beautiful humming tone made Sarah's mind sway. She can face the werewolf Eric of Sunshine Boy rationally, and she can hold back her fear and feelings towards Rose Hill, but she can't resist Rox's unique charm skills. His voice had a fatal attraction for her. Sierra put her arms around Rox's neck and kissed the half-opened lips. His long silver hair spread down her back, some of it stuck to her neck, and water droplets from the ends of her hair fell on her skin. The cold touch made Sierra shiver, but Logosied held her face with his hands and responded to her eagerly but clumsily. The mermaid who only appeared in rumors escaped from the top of the high water tank and kissed the beautiful aristocratic girl outside the cage. This picture spread out in the dark was looked at by the short man who came in. Sensing a strange noise behind her, Sierra woke up and quickly ended the kiss. She put her hands around the mermaid's neck and took a small breath. Logosied did not let go of the girl in his hand, and looked sharply at the peeper with half-closed eyes. Her shoulders were tightly hugged by Logosied, and she heard a low and unfamiliar language coming from his resonant chest and mouth. The peeping short man's eyes were blank for a moment, his body swayed, and he fell straight into the haystack inside with his eyes closed. There was an orangutan with two mouths in the iron cage next to him. It rushed over and grabbed the man's arm, dragged him to the cage, scratched his clothes to pieces, and scratched several bloody marks on his back. Sierra turned her head and saw this scene, and understood what was going on. She tugged on a strand of Lucid's hair with her fingers. "Did you do it?" He lowered his head, and his moist lips wanted to come close to continue the kiss just now. Sierra struggled and leaned back, covered his mouth with one hand, and said with a red face, "You can't seduce me anymore, this is a foul." Knowing that she was resisting, Logosied slowly let go of her, poked her shoulder with his webbed claws, and said softly, "Sella, it's the princess." Sierra was stunned. "I'm a princess." She didn't understand what it meant until Logosied turned his finger and pointed at the bridge of her nose, prince. The memory of sailing on the ship came back instantly, and Syrah remembered the crazy version of the mermaid she told Roxad. The mermaid prince at the bottom of the sea fell in love with the princess who rowed 3 boats, and was willing to split his legs for love. It seems that she made it up, but it was entirely used by her to remind Roxad not to fall in love with Anaxi. Sierra held his finger, feeling a little guilty inexplicably. Okay, Luxide, that was just a joke. Listen now, my sister will definitely come and buy you in the evening. She lives in the same place as me. You just follow her and you'll see me. The words were too long. Luoxied shook the half of the fishtail still in the water tank and didn't understand. Sierra had to use body movements and words to tell him several times, submit, be obedient, and I will take you away. I had only a half understanding of what he said before, but after hearing the words I will take you away, his eyes lit up, and he touched her face with his webbed paws again, and nodded lightly. He got it? Syrah breathed a sigh of relief. After Luoxied obediently covered the protective net and fell back into the water, she tidied up her clothes and hair and walked out. The mermaid is simply a habitual criminal who uses beauty to commit crimes. He knows very well how to use his own advantages to seduce her. Sierra swung her skirt, and most of her clothes were wet with water. There was no way she could rush home and change clothes now. Lizzie would definitely not let her go out again if she knew that she had beaten someone. She could only go to the town to find a place to sit and at least dry her clothes. The dwarf lying on the backstage of the show woke up from a burst of pain. He completely forgot what happened a few minutes ago. Dragging his broken back and a hand that had a thumb chewed off by an orangutan, he screamed in pain and cursed. Go out. People in the show saw the scene and rushed him to the hospital. Someone immediately went back to check the backstage and found that everything was normal inside. The mermaid was lying quietly at the bottom of the tank, with only a piece of silk covering it falling to the ground. You just brought a woman into the show, did you forget? I didn't bring a woman with me. I fainted when I went to check on those monsters, and that damn smelly gorilla took the opportunity to attack me. I don't have much money, so the medicine I use must be cheaper. The dwarf tremblingly took out money from his pocket to pay for the medical expenses. When he saw a large note emerging from the shriveled leather armor, he was stunned. All memories about Syrah were wiped out of his mind by Lucid, and he had no idea where the money came from. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Shur. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 33. The sun was warm in the spring afternoon in April. Sierra was basking in the sun and walked slowly past a flower shop. Then she met Gale at the door of a butcher shop, who was discussing with the boss. His strong body and olive skin were so different from those around him. Gale. Sarah called him at the door of the store. Gale frowned and turned his head, looking worried. Hey, Sierra. She stepped onto the steps and asked curiously, what's wrong? Are you here to buy meat? It seems difficult for a hunter to buy meat. I am planning to rent out this shop, the boss said to her. I can't lower the rent anymore. This is a prime location. The minimum is 10 gold coins a year. No more renting now. Gale walked down the steps. 10 gold coins a year, we can't even sell enough meat to pay back. When Sierra heard the reason, she quickly went down the steps and followed him. It's a good thing to start a business. I can help. Gale glanced at her and shook his head firmly. We never accept help from outsiders. His steps were so big and fast that Sierra could only keep up with him as he trotted all the way. Gale, hey Gale. Have you ever heard of investing? My help is not without conditions. You know I am also very poor. Need money. Gale finally slowed down and turned to look at her. What do you mean? He and his tribe have lived in the jungle for a long time and have not yet learned about the emerging ways of making money among the rich. Sierra gasped and said, your money and I pool our money together, and we rent this store together. If the store earns more than the annual rent and costs in the future, I will draw a certain percentage of the money. It's fair. I can take the risk of not making money with you. She looked up at the tall man in front of her. How about you think about it? Sounds good. Gale narrowed his eyes, hesitation and impulse pulling back and forth in his mind. A dangerous smell rushed into his nose, and his thoughts were suddenly interrupted, leaving only the body's instinct to defend himself. He looked sharply towards the black classic car approaching at the end of the street, and his muscles all tensed up into hard lumps. Sierra hadn't noticed anything unusual about him yet, so she just said, "Don't rush to give me an answer. Eric will come to the manor to deliver meat. Let him tell me then. We'll talk about it later. You should go home to Sarah now," Gale said in a deep voice. As soon as Sierra heard the danger in his tone, the classic car stopped behind her. Gale grabbed her arm and pulled her behind her, looking warily at the car window with the white curtain. A corner of the curtain was opened by a hand wearing a leather glove, and half of Rose Hill's stern side face was hidden in the darkness, while her dark eyes stared at Sierra outside. "Get in the car, Sierra." He raised his lips slightly and his voice was indifferent and pleasant. Gale grasped Sierra's arm tightly and whispered, "Do you know each other?" "Well, you go back first, Gale." Sierra, who quickly cleared her mind and entered a state of preparation for war, broke away her hand, raised her head and said to him, "Think carefully about what I said. I'm leaving first." Gale said with a warning, "You must go home at night." Sierra nodded, opened the door of the classic car and got into the leather back seat. Aldine, who acted as the driver, turned around and said hello to her. The disgust on his young face could not be concealed. "Miss Sarah, you stink like a fish that has been dead for a month." Sierra subconsciously raised her arms and smelled herself. The sea water did not leave any smell on her body. She ignored him and turned to look at Rose Hill beside her. She curled her fingers uneasily and said, "Good afternoon, Duke. Where are you taking me?" Rose Hill stared at her. He didn't know where he was taking people. He just saw her with a smelly wild wolf when he was passing by. He felt extremely repelled. Sierra always felt a chill in her back when she saw his expressionless look. She calmed down and took the initiative to stretch her white and tender palms in front of him to raise the topic. "I gave you a bracelet before the shipwreck. Now it's time to return it. Give it to me." He wouldn't like her anyway, and I don't know if the bracelet was thrown away or not. It was still worth a lot of money. Thinking of the smelly ditch she might be in, Sierra felt a pang of pain in her heart. Rose Hill said calmly, "It's not lost." She was startled. Didn't she lose it? Really? Seeing her disbelief, Rose Hill was unexpectedly in a good mood. He raised the corners of his lips slightly and said, "Well, it's not lost." "No, how do you know what I'm thinking?" Sierra took back her hand and asked doubtfully. "It's all on his face." Aldine glanced in the rearview mirror. A hint of light red immediately appeared on Sierra's cheeks, and she said angrily to him, "Don't talk." "Then please don't give it back to me." She turned her head again and asked Rose Hill beside her, "Are you really going to invite me to church on the weekend?" The girl's eyes were wide open and her milky brown irises were filled with anticipation. "I never lie." Rose Hill's narrow, beautiful eyes narrowed slightly, implying that she was a duplicitous liar. This was the second time that Sierra felt guilty today, although she didn't know what she felt guilty about in front of him. Maybe it was because of the kiss on the balcony. She twirled her fingers and said, "Are we going just the two of us? You won't invite anyone else, right?" Rose Hill didn't understand why she always thought her sister would be attractive to him. The other party's unintelligible voice was indeed worth gathering, but it was not worth his energy. He said quietly, "Who else do you think?" Sierra thought for a while, then lowered her head and sighed, "My sister wants to be our guide. I'm not familiar with it, let alone know where there is a church. I understand that having a guide can indeed save a lot of trouble in finding the way, but..." She shrugged, glanced at him cautiously, and said in a low voice, "I don't want to go out with her, it's just the two of us." "God bless her," she told the truth in front of him, "I hope she won't be disliked." Rosehill chuckled, with a hint of joy and satisfaction in his eyes. "Okay." Sierra was stunned again when she saw how obvious the curve of the corners of his lips was. The statue of the god snapped from the mural was smiling at her. Seeing her worthless appearance, Aldine couldn't help but complain, "Stop spitting, Miss Sarah, I just wiped my leather back seat." Sierra suddenly raised her hand to cover her mouth, her chin was clean and no drool came out. She glared at him angrily, "Stop talking." The car finally became quiet. Sierra thought for a while and asked the man next to her who was staring at her without speaking. "I've always had a question, why did you want that maid, murder?" She bit her lip and replaced murder with "did everything happen for a reason?" Rosehill relaxed her back and leaned back in her seat like a human being, her posture changed from aloof to aristocratic laziness. "So, she tried to kill me." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the sure. Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 34. Tried to kill him and then it turned into a free breakfast. Sierra blinked, obviously not believing this argument. "Why would a barmaid want to hurt you?" Rosehill said indifferently, "Because I am a cancer in the kingdom." He controls the underground casinos, Cyan Industries, and arms of the Larini kingdom, and is called a social cancer by the opponent party. This adjective is very appropriate. The sarcasm and disdain in his eyes were seen by Sierra. She thought for a while and only asked, "Do you live in such danger every day? I thought you had everything and lived a comfortable and happy life." Unexpectedly, she would say that. Rosehill raised a thick eyebrow and looked at her thoughtfully. "Danger?" he said playfully, "It is indeed dangerous." Sierra nodded and said solemnly, "I understand. I will try my best to choose a lucky day when I go out with you in the future." The girl in front of him had a serious face, her face was tight, and her warm and bright eyes were full of caution. This look once again made Rosehill laugh without changing her color. She's funny and radiates attraction from the inside out. When pure admiration and fun are blessed in a girl, she becomes more emotionally valuable. The boring black and white life often needs a little color to embellish it, so that it is not too bad. He asked casually, "You really don't consider working for me?" Sierra thought for a while, then shook her head cautiously, and said euphemistically, "I don't want to be your secretary or any other profession." He wouldn't give her the status she wanted. This sentence swept across the tip of his heart and reached Rosehill's ears. He was not forcing her. When the car passed by the hospital, Sierra happened to see Anai coming out of it, and she quickly said, "I saw my sister." Rosehill's destination was not suitable for a fragile human past like hers. He said quietly, "Stop the car." Anaxi was surrounded by several honey friends. When she saw Sierra getting off the Duke's car, her expression changed slightly. "Sierra, are you and the Duke coming to the hospital?" Sierra shook her head. "Didn't your friend get injured by me? I came to take a look. I happened to meet the Duke on the way and gave me a ride." The girls around an 11 squatted down and saluted the handsome man in the car, their hearts beating fast. The chirping girl's inner fantasies made Rosehill feel irritated. He said to Sierra expressionlessly, "I don't like the smell of animals. Keep it clean when I pick you up on the weekend." Sierra pouted and responded unhappily, "I don't have any taste." Rosehill looked calm and said, "Wash clean." Sierra slammed the car door and made quite a noise. The man inside didn't care about anything with her, and the old car drove away along the street. A young lady next to Anaxi asked her tentatively, "Miss Sarah, are you familiar with the Duke?" Sierra looked at Anaxi, who was trying her best to hide her emotions, curled her lips and smiled brightly. He invited me to visit the church in the town on the weekend. We will visit many places in the morning. Didn't Anaxi tell you? Several girls shifted their gazes and said, I didn't say anything. Anaxi smiled awkwardly, and her pupils retracted in embarrassment. I am just serving as their guide, not worth mentioning. Why didn't she mention it? Why don't we just prevent these girls from creating opportunities for chance encounters? Who doesn't want this walking diamond king? But now it was easy for Sierra to take off the condom, and her smile deepened. It's really not worth mentioning. Can we go to the freak show tonight? Of course, why not have another companion? A girl took the lead in showing her kindness, and the grass fell quickly. Sierra hugged Anaxi's arm enthusiastically. Then let's go shopping together when the time comes. Although Sierra has never set foot on the land of Cambania County, it does not prevent her from using friendly interactions to get to know all the companions around Anasi. It would not be wise to antagonize a group of noble ladies just because of her morning pranks. These people will be her good partners in the future. Seeing her holding a plaid silk scarf in the store and comparing it to herself, Anaxi forced herself to accept it with a smile, and her uneasiness doubled. She knew very well how deep-seated a woman could be if she pretended to be so. Her mother, Josie, was a good example. The stepsister who comes to her side will be her most powerful opponent. It's time to start the night's freak show. Sierra took out a coffee and fish and chips, and drove Anashi's car to the grassland beside the Santa Fe River. Surprisingly, Lizzie and his wife were there too. Seeing Anna 11 walking over quickly to talk and laugh with her family, Sierra, who was left alone by the car, looked a little lonely. Sella, Khalida, the daughter of the president of the Bank of England, suddenly emerged from the crowd, ran to her side and grabbed a small piece of soft fried fish fillet. I like the taste of lemon juice with this. She narrowed her eyes in enjoyment. Sierra, who was with her, said gently, are you coming to the show too? Together? When Sierra passed by Lizzie, she went up to say hello. His face was gloomy. Baron Carter's wife called. You injured his daughter this morning, causing her to lose one of her back molars. She is still in the hospital. Why are you still here watching the show? Facing the many pairs of quietly watching eyes, Sierra glanced at Xiao 11, who also had a reproachful face, and said without humility, that was just an accident. Is it an accident that you hit someone with your own hands? Sierra, you have been living outside for so many years and you have neglected discipline, Josie whispered. First admit your mistake to your father. Sierra stared at her, her eyes half smiling but not smiling. In what capacity do you discipline me? Sierra, Lizzie whispered. Before the three-party quarrel became more ugly, Khalida hooked Sierra's arm in time, took her coffee and took a sip herself. The show is about to start, let's go in. Sierra followed her into the show without looking back. Only Anaxi was left outside to persuade her parents in a low voice. Have you been tricked by that mistress? Khalida pulled her to the front row and asked without hesitation. My place is in the back, Sarah said. It doesn't matter. I don't like sitting in the same row as others. I bought the seat at the front. It's good to be friends with rich people. Sierra sat down with her in a prime spot at the front and explained, they were calculated, but not me. Not you. Khalida turned her head and became interested. Unsurprisingly, drunk driver Joey will soon have new gossip, and the weekend church trip. Sierra looked towards the stage, her bright face smiling brightly. Don't worry, it will never be me who suffers. Anaxi and her mother both followed the path of little white flowers, so of course she had to follow suit. She couldn't endure a kick in the butt for nothing. Vote. Check in with comments. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 35. The freak show only comes to the city of Worley once a year. The big tent set up on the grass is overcrowded. The colorful lights are lit up and hung like a bright starry sky. Billboards for freaks stand on both sides of the entrance. People are constantly pouring in. Inside the show, most of the chairs were occupied, but the first row was empty. Only two girls sitting on the two red chairs in the middle were eating fish and chips. Anaxi glanced at the stage in front, thinking of the mermaid who was about to appear, and walked up from behind and asked Sira softly, "Can we sit together? In exchange for me helping you resolve the beating incident." When she said the second half of the sentence, she glanced at the wealthy businessman's daughter beside Sira intentionally or unintentionally. "It's not good." Khalida rejected Sira directly and said in a contemptuous tone, "Because of you and your mistress mother, my poor friend Sira suffered a lot of ostracism on the ship." Anaxi's face darkened. "Speak with respect. My father and mother are getting married soon." The word mistress will always be an unsavory stain in the history of their mother and daughter's rise to power. "Well, you are 18 years old and they are still considering getting married." Khalida's expression became even more contemptuous. Sierra pulled her up and said apologetically to Anaxi, "Sorry, I didn't buy the seat either." After Anaxi stomped away with an angry look on her face, Sierra changed her expression, curled her lips and said, "I like your unforgiving mouth." "We hit it off," Khalida responded. Sierra corrected her, "It was an instant hit." "Almost," Khalida said nonchalantly. She was now acting like a girl with only money and no education. Sierra smiled and said, "I want to invest in a store." "Do you want to invest in it? Investment? Trust fund? Are you playing this too?" Khalida asked. "No, it's just a common investment in a butcher shop." "That's not interesting. If you plan to set up a factory, I'd be happy to participate." Sure enough, a small amount of money was as unattractive to Khalida as the pocket money on hand, but it was enough to get her following words. Sierra nodded with a smile, "Okay, if I set up a factory in the future, I will come to you." The lights in the room dimmed, and the dazzling cold lights were concentrated in front of the red silk curtain. A host wearing a top hat and a suit walked to the center stage. "I saw in the pictorial that there were camel girls tonight and I've been looking forward to seeing that." Khalida's voice was excited. Sierra glanced at her, "I thought you would like fish-tailed men." "Disgusting, I don't like greasy things." Sierra raised her eyebrows and smiled without saying a word. Nausea. It was one of the most perfect creatures she had ever seen in her life. As the star of the freak show, the camel girl appeared from the red curtain, leading a brown camel. Her calves were completely bent 180 degrees with her toes pointed backwards, walking on all fours, and the way she crawled around the stage like a camel caused many exclamations. Sierra had learned about natural deformities in her own world. She really didn't know what was worth pursuing for such a serious congenital orthopedic disease. The girl should be in a lot of pain. However, the audience is willing to pay the bill and the performers are paid to survive. This is normal. Later, there appeared a strong man-woman with strong male hormones and a full beard, a deformed animal with two heads, and a caterpillar woman with missing limbs. Sierra watched with little interest and had no interest in joining their audience interaction. Until the large water tank that appeared as the finale was pushed onto the stage, and the rollers underneath made a sliding sound against the wooden platform. The whole place was quiet. "I bought this from a fisherman. It is a siren in the ocean that is good at confusing people and only exists in myths." The host deliberately lowered his voice and created a vague atmosphere of terror, which brought the atmosphere of the whole room to a climax. "The tension is urgent. There is a lucky spectator present who can interact with him up close. But please be careful and pay attention to safety." After a series of drumming sounds, the red cloth covering the glass water tank was ripped off by the host. There was a sudden gasp in the audience, and Anaxi couldn't help but stand up. Khalida, who claimed she didn't like greasy creatures, also straightened her back and exclaimed, "Oh my God! Everyone's eyes were close to the level of obsession. They had such emotions. As the host, the owner of the freak show was not surprised at all. His two mustaches were raised high and his eyes were filled with pride. After all, this is the most expensive thing he has ever bought. The charming siren who lives in the deep sea has a giant black fish tail. The fish scales close to the lower abdomen gradually become lighter and blend into the white skin. The long silver hair floats in the water like seaweed. In the middle of the hair, the exquisite face makes everyone amazed. His eyes are like a lake of glowing fireflies. Khalida sighed beside Sira. I swear I have never seen such a mysterious and beautiful creature. Oh my God, he is simply a gift from God. The sound of admiration was heard one after another, and the mermaid's ferocious and vigilant eyes swept over everyone present, finally resting on Sira. Who wants to be the only audience member to come into contact with the siren? The host asked with a smile. Pairs of hands were raised in the venue, and Anaxi also raised her hands. As early as she got the news from the system that the mermaid was in the freak show, she had a relationship with the owner of the show and paid him a separate sum. Money. This time, she bought it in advance. Sierra touched Khalida. How about we go up and have a look? Khalida immediately held up the string bag containing the money. She used the money in this bag to buy the entire row of seats. The host, who originally wanted to refer to Anna 11, glanced at Khalida, hesitated for a few seconds, raised his hand to invite her, come on, then a lady in a blue dress. Anaxi suddenly changed her face, and Sira was pulled onto the stage by Khalida as her companion. The mermaid, who was motionless in the water, swung his long tail, pressed his beautiful body against the glass, and stared at Sira, who walked over. His mouth and hands were tied up with ropes, making him unable to make a sound. There was no way to escape. Seeing that he was tied up now, Sira's mood dropped inexplicably. She didn't like the pitiful look of Roxt being put in the spotlight for people to watch. Khalida stood in front of the water tank and tried to catch the mermaid's attention, but no matter whether she tapped on the glass or made faces, the mermaid inside always stared at the girl next to her. She turned around and said, Sela, stand over here, he seems to be interested in you. Khalida took the initiative to step back and motioned for her to stand at the front. The mermaid inside reacted quickly. He pressed his webbed hands against the glass and stared closely at Sira's every move. Sira, who was wearing a black dress, walked up to the water tank, put one hand against his webbed paw through the glass, pressed her forehead against the water tank, and said in a low and inaudible voice, It's okay, Lucid, relax. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Shur. Author, Mei Goicheng. Chapter 36. The mermaid with ferocious eyes full of animality relaxed his mood. He bent his upper body and lowered his head to meet her through the glass. His docile appearance was completely different from before. Everyone present was shocked by this scene, even the show owner was in disbelief. As a precaution, when he tied a rope around the mouth and hands of the fisherman, he also injured two staff members. An aristocratic girl turned around in surprise and asked, Anna 11, does your sister know the siren? At this time, Anaxi's forehead was throbbing with veins and she was completely in no mood to pay attention to the girl in front of her. She placed her folded hands on her thighs. The upper hand had already scratched several deep red marks on the back of the lower hand with her nails. When did Sira meet the mermaid? She has now stolen the attention of 3 men. Anai was going crazy. Dad, will you buy that mermaid? She turned her head, looked at Lizzie, who was staring intently, and said eagerly, you know, he is full of treasures. Chiao 11 pressed her hand and motioned her to calm down, we will find the best scientists to study him. Sira still held an uneaten bag of fish and chips in her hand. She took the initiative to step onto the movable step box placed next to the water tank, and the mermaid followed her and swam upward. A show worker wanted to warn Sarah of the danger, but was stopped by the boss's eyes. He foresaw a scene that would cause the entire freak show to explode in the future. The protective net pressing on it was easily pushed away by the mermaid's raised hands. His head was half exposed out of the water, and his hair fell down. Everyone watched the scene with bated breath. The beautiful girl leaned forward on the top of the water tank and touched the mermaid's cheek with her slender fingers without fear. Her fingertips went around the back of his head and pulled away the knot. Faint red marks left traces of abuse on Rox's lips, and Syrah gently stroked his lips with her fingers. "Thanks for your hard work." Her fingertips were hooked by the slippery snake head, and the sharp teeth gently bit her fingertips, causing a numb and itchy feeling. When Khalida saw Syrah's mermaid chewing her fingers, she didn't know whether to worry about her fingers or praise her unparalleled courage first. Syrah slowly retracted her fingers, picked up a piece of fried fish in the paper bag and put it to his mouth. "Eat something." The beautiful mermaid obeyed and opened her mouth to accept her feeding. Someone in the audience clapped their hands first, and the scattered applause gradually turned into deafening. "Miss Syrah, you are truly a natural animal tamer," someone shouted at her. Amid the noise, Syrah leaned into Luxid's ear and whispered, "Be patient for a little while, and I promise you will come to me." He turned his head and kissed the side of her neck with his moist lips. "Wait." The tamed mermaid returned to the water obediently and no longer showed any aggression. Syrah calmly walked down the steps while Khalida's pupils were shaking. "What happened? How did you do it?" She still couldn't calm down and couldn't believe what Syrah had done. "Is there a pair of human legs in the fishtail? Can he understand human speech?" Syrah held her arm and walked outside. "We met before on the royal cruise ship. He was caught by the fishing net and I let him go." Khalida was confused for a long time. Then why was he caught ashore again? "I'm curious too." Sierra also didn't understand how the plot here was arranged. "I was struck unconscious by lightning. A nearby whaling ship salvaged it and sold it to me." The show owner followed up with a smile while rubbing his hands. "Miss Sarah's performance really opened my eyes." Khalida remembered that she still had some unpaid wages, so she took out a few large denomination banknotes from her string bag and handed them to him. "This Kraken's experience is really strange and unlucky." Cyril looked back at the water tank that was covered with silk cloth again, and couldn't help but smile. Being simple and easy to deceive is Logosied's label, and now it is quite appropriate to add unlucky. After the freak show ended, Count Lizzie did not leave first. He went to talk to the owner of the show alone. The specific content was unknown to Sierra. She had already said goodbye to Khalida and got in the car to go back with the gloomy-looking Anashi. "Home. You opened my eyes," Anai said, unconvinced. Syrah, who pretended not to understand, tilted her head and smiled like a flower. "The same to you." As the car passed the tavern, Sierra asked someone to stop the car and reminded Joey to remember to lead the two horses back. Joey staggered out of the bar after he had finished talking. Anaxi was very unhappy when she saw her servant drunk like this. "Sela, you can't allow a servant to get drunk during work." "I came from the path of the manor today under Yolanda's guidance." Sierra changed the subject directly. In the dark car, only the warm street lights outside the window shone in, and her expression could not be seen clearly. "You know this." "What, Anai?" "I don't know. She must have lost her mind to lead you in the wrong direction," Anai denied. She vaguely felt something was wrong. "What's wrong?" Sierra said no more. On the day of the weekend church trip, she got up early. There was still a week before the full moon of the mourning period, and she still couldn't wear any other color. She and the servant were picking through the black dresses in the cupboard, and Sierra chose light travel attire. Compared with her low-key printed black shirt with false collar and half-length velvet skirt, Anashi's Christmas tree dress is obviously well-intentioned. The layers of beige expensive interlining and waist brace are really dazzling and tiring to look at. Cyril looked at her and said half-jokingly, "You might be short of an ostrich feather hat." Anai replied, "It's not that grand." It turned out that she knew it wasn't so grand. Sierra twitched her lips and looked away, then walked to the restaurant to have breakfast. At the dinner table, Mrs. Josie deliberately asked Anai, "Where are you going today?" She smiled and said, "I am going to take Sierra and the Duke to see the church together. I have planned the route." Lizzie also had a gentler attitude towards Sierra. "This is how sisters should be. When you come back, remember to go to the hospital with Anashi to see Baron Carter's daughter and apologize to her." Sierra picked up a napkin and wiped her mouth, looking like she suddenly understood. "I forgot to mention that I met the Duke on the street yesterday. He refused my request for a guide, so there are only two of us on the trip today." The spoon in Anaxi's hand fell to the floor, splashing a small piece of skirt and expensive plush carpet. The family of four, except Sierra who was in a happy mood, all had dark faces. "Sella, is it fun for you to tease me?" Anai's eyes were red and she was about to cry. She said this in front of so many aristocratic ladies yesterday, but today she kicked out her guide. What kind of social disaster this will cause in the future. Anna Ziguan felt that her chest was so tight that she could hardly breathe just thinking about it. Guess. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 37. I will definitely be despised. She really couldn't help crying, and she cried very sadly. The culprit, Sierra, blinked innocently. "It's not fun to tease people, but I just forgot to remind you last night. After all, we came back too late and everyone was very sleepy. So you can't blame her for having a bad memory." Josie held Anashi's trembling hand under the table, maintaining a dignified smile on her face. "Don't do this again, Sierra, it was you who broke Anashi's heart." Sierra smiled unapologetically. "Yes, Mrs. Josie, don't do this again. It's not good to hurt my heart." The battlefield between women was filled with invisible gunpowder smoke. Lizzie threw away her knife and fork irritably and suddenly stood up in an ungentlemanly manner. "Anai won't go unless the Duke lets her go, but Sierra, you must go to the hospital when you come back and ask Baron Carter for help. Daughter, admit your mistake." The servant who answered the door came in and reminded, "The Duke of Rosehill's car has arrived." Sierra stood up and responded obediently, "I will go and apologize." Instead of apologizing, she held a banner and carried a fruit basket to apologize. The weather was very nice over the weekend, and the gravel road leading to the manor was scorching hot from the sun. The moment before Sierra stepped out of the door, she was still thinking about how Rosehill would go to the church with her. Will his body turn into a sparkling human-shaped faceted diamond, or would it be burned to ashes by the sun and disappear into ashes? Her curiosity disappeared when she saw a classic car parked in a shadow outside the door. Spending a whole day with a mind-reading vampire was mentally draining. Aldine stood in the shadows, his pale and bloodless hands opening the rear door. "Get in the car, Miss Sarah." Sierra took a deep breath and bent down to get into the car. Early in the morning, Eric was waiting at the back door with a wild deer. His eyes were always looking at the door that he could not step into, and he was secretly expecting a girl in a black dress with a bright smile to come out of it. They would go hunting together in the jungle, and he would teach her how to use a shotgun. The rabbits they hunted would be made into spicy rabbit heads for her. Just thinking this, the corners of Eric's lips began to rise unconsciously. As soon as Anaxi opened the door, she saw the sunny and handsome Eric's eyes suddenly brightened, and then dimmed obviously after seeing her, and even the corners of his lips became straight. "Good morning, Anna." He nodded to her and asked politely, "I want to ask." "Where is Sierra?" Anaxi interrupted him, staring at him with red eyes and accusing, "Don't you care about what happened to me this morning? Why am I so sad?" Eric thought for a while and replied, "You feel bad when the Duke invited Sierra to the church without you. She went to church, and although he knew that this must not be her intention, he still felt inexplicably worried and sad. The words that Anna 11 was about to accuse Sarah behind her back were stuck on her lips, and she subconsciously denied it. That's not the case. It has nothing to do with the Duke. It's just that Sarah broke my heart. If Eric hadn't heard those words in Sarah's quilt that night, he might have been deceived by his noble friend. He suddenly asked her calmly, "Do you consider me a friend?" Anaxi was stunned, not understanding why he asked so suddenly. She immediately said, "Of course, we grew up together and will always be each other's best friends. I never mind your identity and playing with you, you know." "Why are you sad?" Eric's question finally returned to the point where she wanted to accuse. Anaxi wiped her eyes aggrievedly. "Sela invited me to be her church guide on the weekend. I prepared for a long time to plan the route. I got up at 4 o'clock today, but when it was time to go out, she refused to come with me. Going out, she hurt me." Eric listened expressionlessly, and when she started crying, he turned around and left without saying a word of comfort. At the same time, on Anaxi's system panel, Eric's affection value for her dropped sharply from the full 30 to 20. She stood alone at the back door and saw this sudden change. She even forgot to cry and was completely confused. "What happens?" Sierra, who still didn't know that Anna 11 was losing points, was sitting in the car. She lifted a corner of the car curtains. The sun was scorching the earth, and the changeable temperature was surprisingly high today. She turned to look at Rose Hill, who looked obviously gloomy, leaned over and whispered, "How about I go home with you directly?" These suggestive words made Aldine slip his hand and almost drive the car to a stall on the street. Sierra was thrown sideways by this sudden turn and bumped into Rose Hill's arm. She instantly felt like her brain was shattered like a piece of tofu hitting a marble. Hiss. Sierra put her head against his arm and clenched her hands into fists. When the car stabilized, she remained in the same position for a while without moving or making a sound. Rose Hill called her softly, "Look up, Sarah." Seeing that she didn't respond, he frowned, put his hand on her shoulder and pushed her away gently. "Sierra." She bit her lip and looked up, tears in her eyes. Rose Hill was startled by this tearful look of trying to hide the pain, and a trace of unnaturalness flashed through his emotionless black eyes. "Why are your arms so hard?" Sierra covered her head and trembled. "Has my head turned into a triangle?" Rose Hill's expression showed no change in response to her accusation. He glanced at Aldine in front of him, who did not dare to look back, and slowly took off his leather gloves. The warm palms were pressed against Sierra's painful head, and the slightest coolness had a considerable analgesic effect. "What are you doing?" She put down her hand and sniffed and asked quietly. "Check your skull," Rose Hill said quietly. "You're lucky you weren't hurt." She thought he touched the top of her head to comfort her, and that his feelings were like a doctor's examination. Sierra was a little disappointed. She raised her hand to touch his hand. Rose Hill did not stop her movement. He visibly shrank when the warm little hand touched the back of his hand. The touch of her fingertips was colder than the temperature through her hair, and Sierra said softly, "Your hands are so cold. Are you feeling uncomfortable?" She took his hand and held it gently in her hands. The pain on her head seemed to be diverted away, and all her eyes and attention stayed on the well-jointed bone in her hand. Slender and long hands. Rose Hill stared at the hand she held, and her dark irises began to smear dark red as they approached the center of her pupils. The girl's approach and touch gave him the desire to eat. Sierra didn't know what he was thinking, and the look he was looking at her was getting more and more dangerous. She always felt that this was not going to work, so she let go of Rose Hill's hand, grabbed the black bow tie he tied around his neck instead, leaned over and raised her neck to kiss his thin lips. Just like that night on the balcony, she carried out a second sneak attack. "After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure." Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 38. Rosehill's lips were still as cold as ice, like jelly that had been chilled in the refrigerator, exuding the faint fragrance of roses after the rain, which made people intoxicated. He lowered his eyes and stared at the girl who was close by, and when he heard her describing her lips as sweet rose-flavored jelly, his rotten heart was touched to life again. When the girl tried to pry his lips apart further, Rosehill finally couldn't help but hold her waist and press her back into her seat. "What are you doing?" His cold voice finally had a hint of abnormal emotion. Sierra licked her lips and looked at the masterpiece she had chewed wet, with a serious look on her face. "You caused me to have a bump on my head, I'll charge you some compensation for the damage." He lifted her chin and sneered, "Really? So this is your special way of collecting compensation from everyone?" Sierra shook her head and lied seriously, "No, I'm only special to you." Rosehill narrowed his eyes and looked scrutinizing. "You won't like me. What's wrong if I kiss you? It won't be a burden to you." Sierra looked away guiltily, twisted her hands together, and spoke in a softer voice, "Besides, it was indeed your arm that hit me, so I charged you some medical expenses." Such a rogue with such a good reason, such a shameless woman. Aldine didn't see many of them from following her master in the 14th century to the 19th century. Most of them had their necks broken when they moved their mouths. She was really the only lucky one. Rosehill's beautiful face was rarely speechless. He slowly retracted his hand and turned his head to look forward without saying a word. He should also be speechless by his rogue attitude. Sierra raised the corners of her lips and touched the top of her hair with her hand, then put her hand down with a twisted look on her face. The bones were indeed not injured, but the bulge was unavoidable. It really hurt, it hurt her to death. His muscles must be made of stone. Hearing Sierra's inner cries of pain and complaints, Rosehill unconsciously turned back to glance at her, and took off her leather gloves to touch the arm she had bumped into just now with her porcelain white fingers. Humans are different from vampires. His muscle structure is comparable to the hardest diamond, while her body is as fragile as a fragile flower stem. Rosehill lowered his eyes and said softly, "Just take it as compensation." Sierra turned her head in surprise when she heard his sudden words, "Huh." The handsome vampire looked at her and calmly repeated, "That kiss is compensation for you." Sierra was dumbfounded for a while, then she lowered her head silently with her red face. "It's strange that he is willing to cooperate with her." The atmosphere in the car became ambiguous in vain. Aldine looked in the rearview mirror from time to time, surprised that Sierra's expression was as close as looking at God's masterpiece. It only took Aldine a few hours to run back and forth in the city to find the church. Moreover, this was not the first time he and his master had landed on this land. He knew where there was an old holy church. In the end, their car did not turn around and go home. The small church in the center of the town is a place where people, including the lower classes, often go. A row of stained glass windows squeezed into the center of the pillars made the entire room light and bright, and there was no one on the solid wood benches. They missed the morning service. Sierra was still quite worried about Rosehill. As soon as he stepped out of the car with her, his whole body was bathed in the sunshine. He didn't sparkle like a diamond as described in the novel, but his excessively pale skin and light cyan dark circles were clearly special enough. Sierra didn't know what kind of damage the ultraviolet rays in the mist would cause him. He had no sign of being wiped out and was still looking indifferent. "Have you ever been here?" She took the initiative to initiate the topic. "No," Rosehill replied, his eyes slightly mocking. "A soulless corpse is not acceptable to God, who can do nothing but come in and cause carnage." "Hi, Sierra." A girl's voice was deliberately suppressed from behind. Sierra turned around, looking confused. Seeing that she had forgotten about him, the other party immediately added familiarly, "I was also there when we played golf at Mawson Manor last time." She had no hope of catching the Duke here, but she was really lucky. Sierra raised her eyebrows and reacted, "Oh, I remember you. It's a surprise to meet you and the Duke here. The girl stepped forward and bowed to Rosehill with a blushing face. Sierra smiled half-heartedly. It's quite unexpected. Where's Anaxi? She's not here? I remember she was your guide, she asked curiously. Sierra glanced at Rosehill and suddenly noticed that his cheeks were a little abnormally red. Did those rays of light through the stained glass windows illuminate his face? He doesn't look like a person with blood. Sierra looked away without trace, turned to the girl and said, "Guide. There is no one." That's what she said at the time. The girl was stunned. I only agreed to cater to her face, Sierra said to her apologetically. The itinerary between me and the Duke has been arranged by his servant Aldine, and my sister was not involved. So that's it. The girl's eyes flickered, and she immediately recommended herself. I don't think a servant in the capital is familiar with the history of this church, so why not come with me? No, I have something else to do. Let's talk next time when we play golf. Sierra took Rosehill's hand and said, "Let's go." Her steps were very fast, and she hurriedly pulled people to the car outside. The girl, who had only brushed her face in front of the Duke, stamped her feet. "As stingy as your sister." Sierra pulled the person back to the car without any resistance. She pulled the car curtains to block the windows tightly to prevent any light from leaking in before turning around. Seeing her coordinated movements, Rosehill was about to ask a question when a pair of small hands held his face, and then a beautiful little face with worried eyes came close to him. Her sudden approach made him frown in discomfort. "Sella, what are you doing?" Rosehill's chiseled face was as pale and smooth as porcelain, with almost no pores visible, let alone red marks on them. Sierra, who was observing from a close distance, raised her eyebrows. "Huh? What's going on?" She moved closer. Rosehill held her wrist with one hand and stared at her with dark eyes. "What's going on?" "It was here just now." She stroked his cheek with her fingers that were not caught, and said seriously, "He was sunburned." "I thought you were burned by the sun." Sierra exhaled, then looked happy. "I was wrong, it was a false alarm." Rosehill's eyes suddenly darkened, and he grabbed both of her wrists and pushed the girl's delicate body into the leather back seat. Sierra was suddenly pressed by his body, his cold breath fell on her cheeks, and her heart tightened. "Recommendation votes and collections have to be increased by one, right? One price. The number of voters today is 99 plus. Yesterday there were only 70 plus, carrot. I went to PK today, so I tried my best. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure." Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 39. "Do you think I will be burned by the sun?" Rosehill's voice showed no emotion. Aldine saw the movement behind him and wisely got out of the car to wait. "It's a bit like being covered with coffin boards, and it's really suffocating." Sierra's mind went blank for a moment, and she twisted her wrist. After finding that she couldn't move, she sighed quietly. "I really saw it. When I met you before, you were never in the sun. I thought you had porphyria and I was afraid of you. I pulled you out because something happened." Porphyria, a pitiful disease that causes red spots and blisters when exposed to sunlight, is indeed similar to vampires' dislike of sunlight. Rosehill's lips were pursed and her brows were lowered. Her explanation made him look even more unhappy. If she knew the inside story, he would have every reason to give her his first embrace and make her his descendant, but she didn't know that she didn't break the rules, she just purely cared about him. "What's wrong?" Sierra moved her body uncomfortably, but he grabbed her hands and pressed her tightly against the back seat of the car. This ambiguous posture was really awkward. She noticed that Rosehill's expression seemed to become a little disappointed. Either the anger of worrying that the secret will be exposed, or the pure disappointment of not being heard. Sierra rolled her eyes slightly and whispered, "But I do have a secret about you. Can you lower your head a little?" "There are only two of us in the car." Rosehill lowered her head, her pale black eyes seeming to see through all her little thoughts. Sierra said seriously, "Just in case, What if someone stands by the car door and eavesdrops? The young lady who had just followed him from the church saw that the car was not leaving, so she secretly approached the car and glanced behind the car curtain intentionally or unintentionally, hoping to see what was going on inside. At this moment, Sierra's heart went blank, and Rose Hill suddenly couldn't hear any of her thoughts. Her good and bad abilities prompted him to slowly lower his head until the tip of his nose was almost touching her. Sierra raised her chin and kissed him on the lips. After the previous two sneak attacks, Rosehill didn't react at all to this one. He listened expressionlessly as the girl's heartfelt shouts of victory returned to his ears. She's probably addicted to taking advantage. Rosehill thought this until her lips were bitten by her teeth, and a girl's proud little voice came in front of her. I told Anaxi this morning that you didn't let her go to church, but in fact it was me who didn't want to go to church with her. If she shares with you, you must remember to take the blame for me. A certain nerve in Rosehill's body was suddenly touched. Should we say that vampires have no desires? That's a lie. Their physical abilities are destined to be hundreds of times more sensitive than humans in every aspect. Just as Sierra was about to pull her hand away while kissing, a big hand was placed on the thin back that was pressed against the leather back seat, and her body was picked up by Rosehill. Without any warning, her delicate body was pressed into a stone-like chest, and cold lips pressed towards her. Just like the storm that came that night, the attack was fierce. It has been a long time since Sierra traveled through time, and for the first time, she made a big fuss with an inhuman creature at the entrance of a sacred church. The noble lady who wanted to peek outside was stunned when she saw the car shaking up and down violently. Sarah has actually hooked the Duke. Still playing so hard. She gripped the hem of her skirt angrily and buttoned off the small sequins sewn on it. Aldine, who was originally standing in the shadows of the church porch waiting for his master to finish, looked at a butcher shop not far away with unfocused eyes, a red light flashing in his eyes. Rosehill in the car also turned his head and looked at the window in front, his eyes darkening. The buttons of his suit were almost untied by Sierra. She quickly moved her hands away after breaking away from the kiss, and followed his gaze to the outside of the windshield in front of her. If she wasn't blind, Eric and Gail were standing in front of the butcher shop, both of their eyes focused on their classic car. Even though it was far away, she could feel that Eric was angry. After all, she broke her appointment this morning. Broken the contract? Did he invite you? Rosehill lowered her eyes, but the hand on her lower back was not in a hurry to leave. Sierra looked sideways at him suspiciously. Why do I always feel like you are like a roundworm in my stomach? He knew everything she was thinking. I don't like this adjective. A wrinkle appeared on Rosehill's smooth forehead. Oh, Eric and I agreed that if you don't go to the church with me, we will go hunting together, Sierra explained honestly, and there was no need to lie in this regard. Rosehill's thick eyebrows frowned deeper, and it was rare that such a bad mood accumulated on his face. Don't interact with them. Sierra blinked. They also told me the same thing. Do you know each other? Rosehill pulled up her lips with a mean smile. We barely know each other. Sierra nodded, then shook her head. But they are my friends. Stay away from those stinky people, he said with disgust on his face. Sierra was unhappy. She pushed away the cold hands around her waist that were still holding her, wrinkled her face and said, they don't stink at all. They are always dressed very clean and have no smell. What's more, it was Eric who saved me from freezing to death in the sea. She moved her butt to the car door and said unhappily, you can't say that about my friend and savior. Rosehill turned his face sideways and said in a cold voice, they are not worthy of being your friends, Sierra. Sierra was really angry, and her pretty little face sank. Can only rich people like you be my friends? Rosehill didn't speak. His expressionless face already made his position clear. Mr. Rosehill, you are so mean to disappoint me. Go visit the remaining churches by yourself. Sierra opened the car door with her little hand, completely ignoring the vampire behind her who was frozen into a statue. She stepped into the sunshine with her little leather shoes, closed the car door and ran towards the butcher shop. Watching her leave angrily, Aldine stood in the shadows and sighed. Centuries later, it seems his master still doesn't know how to pick up women. Eric, who was in a depressed mood, was walking side by side with Gail. The scene he just saw made sour bubbles bubble in his heart. Eric. Wait for me. Eric. I seemed to hear Sierra's voice. Eric lowered his eyes and looked at the ground. She's coming after her. Gail turned his head. As soon as Eric's expression changed, he heard a familiar girl's voice shouting breathlessly from behind, Eric. His steps suddenly stopped, and he subconsciously straightened his back and quickly turned around. The girl in a black skirt ran towards him against the flow of people. She was running so fast that she was about to bump into someone. Eric took a few steps back uncontrollably, catching her body and letting him rush into his arms. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 40. He hugged her and staggered back 2 steps to stand still, with a surprised voice, Sierra? What are you doing? Dad asked me not to forget to go to the hospital today and apologize to Baron Carter's daughter. Sierra looked up in his arms and smiled, how about you go with me? Eric pulled her under the shed set up by the shop next to him. He looked at the densely covered black classic cars passing by, then lowered his head and asked, are you being bullied? Glancing at the car that was speeding away, Sierra bit her lip, the Duke doesn't like you, and I had a fight with him. I have nothing to say to him. She turned back to him and said angrily, he doesn't like it, but I like it. He wants you to stay away from us, Eric asked. Well, why would I stay away from you? Sierra said unhappily, we are good friends. Eric, who was in a bad mood, suddenly felt a surge of warmth in his chest, and the sour bubbles he had originally no longer vomited. He curled his lips, it's still early, how about I accompany you to buy some fruit? You can't go empty-handed for a visit. Gail was carrying a bunch of unsold wild boar meat next to him, I'll go back to accompany Greenie first. He took 2 steps out, thought for a while, then turned back to Sierra and said, about opening a butcher shop, Robinson agreed to your conditions. Sierra was overjoyed and said happily, okay, how about we talk about this together when I come to the mountain as a guest? Gail nodded, told Eric not to go home too late, and then turned and left. Eric, who was taller than Sierra, took advantage of his height advantage to gently rub the top of her hair. We open a butcher shop together, you just want to help us, right? The top of the head that had been hit not long ago immediately felt a pain. Sierra hugged her head and shouted, don't touch my head, it was swollen just now. As soon as he heard that she was injured when she went out with the vampire, Eric immediately moved gently and carefully put his hand on her head. I was often injured when hunting before, let me take a look at it for you. Sierra lowered her head obediently and let the warm fingers move her hair to examine her scalp. After a while, Eric took back his hand and breathed a sigh of relief to comfort her, the bone is fine, it's just a little swollen. It may take a few days for the bulge to go away. I'm not sure if there will be any sequelae. Sierra raised her head and put on a smile, as long as you can go down, it won't be particularly painful. Tears of pain welled up in her eyes, but she only comforted him and said it was okay. Feelings of pity and anger swept through Eric's chest, and he sank, he hurt you and forced you. So he did see the kiss in the car just now from such a distance. Sierra shook her head, no, it was really just an accident. Let's go buy fruit, Eric. She took one of Eric's little fingers and shook it coquettishly, her eyes like a lake full of leaves in autumn, with rippling water inside. Eric's heart skipped a beat, and the little finger held by her unconsciously bent, his palm half wrapped the back of her tender hand, and he responded in a low voice, "Let's go." Aldine, who was in charge of driving, glanced at the silent owner in the rearview mirror and met his dark eyes, and he immediately looked away. After the car drove for a few minutes, he tentatively spoke, "A group of dirty and smelly werewolves, Syrah's poor sense of smell can't smell them. At most, she can only smell the smell of sunlight on them." Rosehill said expressionlessly, "Don't remind me that I was wrong." "You never make mistakes." Aldine closed his mouth. When this thought sprouted in his mind, the master probably heard it. The noble vampire in the back row raised his chin, his thin jaw was tight, and his narrow eyes showed annoyance. To save her disciples' worries, Sierra planned to buy a fruit basket directly from the fruit shop next to the hospital. There is also a flower shop and tailor shop next to it. Carol, who was mending clothes, saw Eric passing by the store with sharp eyes, and came out of the store quickly. "Eric. Eric. I made a dress for you, look at it." Sierra turned her head subconsciously and looked at Eric beside her, making clothes. "You have a girl you like." He shook his head, "No. He doesn't like Carol from the tailor shop at all, he likes girls who look pretty and soft." Looking at the wide-eyed girl next to him, his throat rolled and he quickly looked away. "Carol," Eric greeted the girl who came up from behind. "Try it. This is a Henley shirt I made with new fabric. It suits you very well." The girl ignored Sierra and unfolded the off-white dress with a little collar print to show him. "The workmanship is good, and the fabric drape looks good. Sierra can tell at a glance that this dress is not cheap." She took the initiative to make room. "You guys chat, I'll go to the fruit shop to buy a fruit basket first." "Sierra," Eric called her, but she didn't look back. "Sierra," Carol glanced at the girl who was walking away and said suddenly, "Speaking of Earl Lizzie's family, his eldest daughter held a golf party 2 days ago and set up a scheme with this girl." There was no surprise on Eric's face and he just asked, "How do you know?" Carol was minding her own business while comparing the size of his Henley shirt to him, while saying, "It was spread all over this morning that Mrs. Josie didn't like the daughter of Mr. Lizzie's first wife, and asked the servants to spread the wrong message to let her go on purpose. Went to the golf course and got bullied by the girl lying in the hospital. Does she want to buy a fruit basket and go to the hospital? If she hadn't fought back at that time, she might have been bullied to death. Why would she go to visit?" "You're right." Eric nodded and took a step back. "Don't give me clothes, I can't pay for them." "You don't need to pay me. I saw how much fabric there was and made one for you." He said bluntly, "Carol, I have someone I like." Carol lost the smile on her face and let go of her hands holding the clothes. "When will you stop raising your neck to eat swan meat? People don't look down on you at all." Syrah's bright smile flashed in Eric's mind, the corners of her lips curled up slightly. No need to look up. The beautiful little swan would come ashore to find him. Sierra was picking apples. The boss asked her if she was going to the hospital to see patients. She nodded. "Please help me choose a fruit basket. I will buy these apples separately." "Miss, won't your servant buy you some fruit?" "Why don't you buy it individually?" The boss looked pitiful. Sierra was stunned. "No, they will buy it, I'm just greedy now." She hasn't had a sip of water since she came out with Rosehill, and her mouth is extremely dry. "I know you are having a hard time at home. Take 2 of these apples and I will give them to you," the boss said generously. Sarah, who was confident in her heart, tilted her head in confusion. "What happened? I was not bullied by anyone." "Oh, the number of voters yesterday was 99 plus, keep it up, babies. Don't ask me again who the male protagonist is, the answer won't be revealed until the ending. All you need to know is Shuangja. Hey hey. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 41. The boss picked up a big apple and put it into her hand. It spread all over the town. I know you are a kind girl. Sierra was holding a red apple in one hand, still not understanding what was going on. Wrap the fruit basket too, I'll pay for it. Eric walked up to Sierra, and he heard everything he just said. Sierra turned to look at him and explained palely, I am really rich and not that poor. Eric's eyes were soft and a smile appeared on his lips. I know, but I can only afford to treat my friends to fruit. Okay, I'll treat you to cake next time. Sierra nodded. Okay, Eric responded with a smile. He bought the fruit basket, holding an apple that the boss insisted on keeping, and they went out side by side. The refreshing and sweet apple entered her mouth and moistened Sierra's dry throat. She looked at Eric's hand holding only the fruit basket and asked curiously, where are the clothes Miss Carol gave you? Didn't you take them? I don't want it. Eric shook his head, I appreciate her kindness. Sierra took another bite of the red apple and asked softly, you don't like her? Then who do you like? Anna 11. You know it's not. Eric shook his head again. He stopped at the door of the hospital and called her softly, Sierra. Sierra stopped after walking a few meters and turned to look at the handsome boy with wheat-colored skin standing by the hospital wall, half of his face buried in the shadows. His mood seemed to suddenly take a turn for the worse. What's wrong, Eric? The girl came back to him and looked at this angular green face. He pressed his eyebrows down, trying to make his facial expression look as serious as possible. If you are unhappy, don't play with Anna 11. Sierra blinked, wondering why the black-haired boy in front of her suddenly said this. If it was just Mrs. Josie bullying her, he would not say this. On the surface, this has nothing to do with Anna 11. Did something happen that she didn't know about? You told me that Anaxi would be a good friend on the mountain before. Sierra looked into those deep and charming eyes and asked strangely, what happened? He lowered his head, his lips almost touching her hair, and said in a low voice, I'm not sure she can be a friend. Sierra was able to determine that Anashe had done something to cause Eric to lose his friendship with her. In any case, this is a good thing for her. She was silent for a while. I thought you would always be childhood sweethearts and be intimate. Eric frowned slightly. Intimate? Never before. Sierra threw away the core and hooked his arm. That's it, then who have you been intimate with? The topic was suddenly diverted by her. Eric recalled it seriously, and a faint blush rose on his wheat-colored cheeks. Does it count to get into a girl's bed in the middle of the night? Sierra shook her finger. If it's my bed, it doesn't matter. We only have pure friendship. Eric's heart was suddenly stabbed. Then there will be no more. Sierra pretended not to see the disappointment on his face, slid her little hand down his arm, and took the fruit basket in his hand. I will consider your words. Now I have to visit the patient. If it is not convenient for you to go in, just stay outside. Wait for me. Seeing the girl carrying a basket into the hospital corridor alone, Eric couldn't help but worry about whether she would be bullied inside. Everyone in the town is familiar with Earl Lizzie's family, and Sarah, who has been in the newspaper, has long been known to the town residents. On her way to the ward following the nurse's guidance, a middle-aged man wearing a trench coat who looked like a gentleman passed her by with a stern face. The nurses called him Mr. Carter. Cyril looked back at his back. Myra, who was lying on the hospital bed, covered her face with one hand. When she saw Sierra coming in with a fruit basket, she held back her tears and said angrily, "What are you doing here?" It was obvious that she was aware of the unfavorable remarks about her reputation, and she looked like she had just been beaten by her father. Girls in this era will be in trouble once they lose the label they deserve as a lady. Sierra smiled and said, "Dad asked me to come and apologize to you." "Who asked you to apologize to me?" "This was an accident in the first place." Myra got off the bed and pushed her out. Sierra put the fruit basket on the bed and pushed back the person who pushed her. "Miss Myra." Sierra pinched her cheeks, forcing her to open her mouth to reveal a row of teeth that was missing a back molar. "Do you still want to be beaten symmetrically?" Myra's arrogant arrogance suddenly shrank, and she turned away her eyes that were about to cry in embarrassment. It's my fault. Now people are spreading the good things that Mrs. Kioxy and I did to you. Dad has already scolded me. You it also hurt me, so it's even. Sierra nodded. I'm glad you think so, but the bad reputation still needs to be restored, right? Myra was stunned. What? She gave her a pure smile. In order to prevent you from being unable to get married due to your bad reputation in the future, I'm here to help you. In the evening of that day, Sierra picked up Myra and was discharged from the hospital. The two of them came out of the hospital as close as sisters. Before they were about to say goodbye, they stood on the street and talked for a long time, which attracted the attention of passers-by. After they finished their conversation, Eric, who was still guarding her, silently sent Sierra back to the manor. It's next week, do you have time to go out with me? He stood at the door, and the dimming sky could not block his expectant eyes. Yes. Sierra hugged him gently, straightened her back, tilted her head and kissed him on the cheek. I will definitely go to the appointment on time this time. You can take me wherever you want. Eric's heart was beating wildly, and deep in his dilated pupils was the girl's bright and open face. His hanging arms unconsciously wrapped around her waist. You can go anywhere. I like your life, Eric. Sierra stared at his shining brown eyes and whispered softly, I like it more than my own life now, so no matter where you take me to play, I will be happy. As she entered the manor, she also took away the whole heart of the handsome young man. Lizzie still doesn't know what happened outside today. All day long, he and his family were busy at home hosting two experts who were engaged in marine life research. Sierra came back before 7 o'clock, just in time for the family to have dinner. She hurriedly changed into a black dinner dress, looked at the new faces at the table, and asked curiously, Dad, who is this? Experts in marine life research, Edward and Thomas. Lizzie introduced. Sierra understood in her heart, nodded and greeted the other party and sat down. I went to pick up Miss Mila from the hospital after I said goodbye to the Duke today. The problem between us has been resolved and we have become good friends.